SHECP Talks. In this space, we invite folks who are or have been part of the Shepherd Higher Education Consortium on Poverty to share valuable insights, experiences, and our lessons they've learned throughout their time with SHEP. My name is Jen Handy, and I'm SHEP's Assistant Director of Grants and Engagement. Joining me today is Dr. Ellen Prusinski, Assistant Professor of Education at Centre College. This semester, Ellen is teaching the course Education Policy and Social Change. I've invited her here today to talk about her course and some of the research she's working on related to community-based learning. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you.
For me, one of the most exciting parts of SHEP is the chance to hear about innovative courses being taught across the consortium. There are courses being taught in philosophy departments, economics departments, health sciences departments, pretty much anywhere. This semester, you're teaching Education Policy and Social Change. Can you share with us a little bit about that course?
Sure. So I really enjoy teaching this course. I'll just start with that. It's one of the classes that is really dynamic for me. So every time I teach it, it looks a little different. And sometimes that makes me tired, but overall, I think that helps me stay engaged. So this is the fourth time I've taught it, and we've examined, I'm like inching towards not perfection, but maybe a model that I think is really coherent. So this basically the central question in the class is, does education policy drive social change or does it follow social change? And this time we're looking at 4 policies that I've identified, and the students get to vote about the last policy we're going to look at. We look at Brown versus Board as an example of an education policy that aims to create a more just society along dimensions of race and ethnicity. We started today to talk about Head Start as an education policy that aims to address inequality along dimensions of socioeconomic status. We'll look at IDEA, diversity along disability, lines of ability and disability, and then our last policy is Title IX, so thinking about gender. And then in the past, when I've let students choose, we've looked at the Guns Free School Act, No Child Left Behind, and charter school laws. And so I think basically the class raises some really foundational questions about how we expect schools and education to be spaces that create more equity in our society, and whether or not we have the policies to support that big social goal of basically relying on schools to try to do what we're not always willing to do in other parts of society. So today, when we started talking about Head Start, we watched LBJ's speech announcing the creation of Head Start and talked about why use preschool as the space to fight the war. This is his language, right? Fight the war on poverty. And why does that make sense? What are the limits of it? What does it tell us about American values that that's where we're willing to fight the war on poverty? So yeah, that's kind of the broad overview of the class.
Wonderful. What are a few of the key lessons or insights you hope students will come away with after the semester or remember long after their time at Centre College?
I guess I think that sometimes we have really, really overly simplistic ideas about schools and education. So either like we can think about how schools indoctrinated us and taught us to be like obedient sheep, or we have this idea that like education is totally liberating and schools are where we disrupt cycles of poverty. And somehow both of those things can be true simultaneously. And so what I kind of hope they come away with is, well, a few things. One is using evidence in education policy making. So we talk about how education policy making has both normative and empirical components. And especially right now, I mean, there's so many proposed policies, some policies that have passed at the state level, including in your home state, I believe, that have really highlighted the normative and values components of education policymaking. They've also really highlighted the ways we have differential access to power in policymaking, and also highlighted the ways we have schools can become spaces where basically larger cultural disagreements start to play out, and how unfair that is to kids. And I hope that students come away with a more nuanced understanding of schools and kind of allow these contradictions to coexist, but that they also come away with some sense of what they can do. Not necessarily, you don't have to run for Congress, right? And like reshape laws, but what they can do to help promote the creation of policies that will lead to a more just society, a more just and equitable society. I think it's really easy to kind of like, it's pretty easy to get down, honestly, on the potential for education policy to contribute to justice. But I think if you take a step back and you look historically and you look at some of these like big policies like Brown versus Board or Title IX, you start to get a more hopeful picture because you can trace some really like powerful outcomes for people and groups. So yeah, that's what I hope.
When you joined Center College in 2014, you were also serving as the coordinator of engaged and experiential learning. How has that experience informed your thinking about course design?
So it really reinforced for me a commitment to community-based learning that I can't always put into practice, if I'm being totally honest. So I love education in part. So I was a political science major as an undergrad, and I love political science for many reasons, but it exists largely in many ways in sort of an academic space primarily. And I love education in part because it gives us the space to ask kind of questions about like political science questions about who has power and how power shapes access to resources, but in an applied way. And education takes the relationship between theory and practice very seriously. And so I think that is perfectly aligned with community-based learning because, you know, obviously what I think community-based learning asks you to do is to explore the relationship between the academic research and academic spaces and the applied world that people who are affected by policy, for example, are actually living out. And this sort of cyclical relationship in some ways. So my first 4 years basically gave me a deep dive into all the research or gave me a space to kind of do this deep dive into all the research that suggests that students understand things more deeply. They actually understand nuance better. They understand why what they're studying related to justice or equity or whatever, these big, like, 10,000 foot concepts, why these matter for people. And so I think so I try to integrate community-based learning whenever I can. And so sometimes that looks like a full, an entire class coming together and doing one project. So during our January term, I taught a class on environmental education, and we worked with a local nonprofit to help them tell their story because they're very unique, and sometimes they have a hard time explaining what they're doing. And so the students in that class interviewed people who had participated in their programs recently about the impact. It's kind of, they're like a totally unique. They're a sculpture garden that aims to basically marry the natural beauty with human created sculptures as a way to increase access to environmental spaces for people who like art but are scared of nature, and then increase access to art for like the opposite, sort of the opposite group. So sometimes we do like full class projects like that. And then sometimes students can choose like a community-based learning project or a research project. So in the fall, I taught a class on the need to diversify the US public school curriculum. Just very timely topic in the fall, again, with some of the legislation that's going through in the Virginia governor's race. And students could choose. So some students did really like sort of traditional academic papers, but other students did really applied projects. So one student worked with our admissions office to talk to them about why, I want to do her project justice, but basically the lens through which they should look at AP scores, and how access to AP classes and AP tests are differentially afforded according to socioeconomic status. And that was like, she did all the research, and then she went and presented and answered all their questions about how they could actually put a more equitable practice into place. And so I love it. I love seeing students take the idea and then run with it. I have seen that when students are out in the world and not just in the classroom exploring these ideas, it helps in all kinds of ways, and including in the classroom, they're more engaged. And I'm really very grateful for those first 4 years here having that dual role, because it helped me develop a value that I've been able to put into practice now on a more regular basis.
But many of the faculty and staff that we work with are doing their own research projects. Can you tell me about a project you're working on right now?
Sure. So this project actually dates back to when I was in the dual faculty staff role, and Danville and Boyle County are classified as a childcare desert, meaning that there are far more children than young children under the age of 5 than there are spots in daycares or early child care centers, early childhood education centers. So a small group 3 students, let me think if what I'm going to say is accurate. All 3 of them did Shepherd internships, now that I think about it. I had to confirm whether that was true, but they were all Bonner students. And we did a collaborative project where we went out to talk to families about the barriers to participating in early childhood education in our community. And so we went door to door in a few neighborhoods. We distributed surveys through the schools. We stood outside of Kroger at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, and the students did that. Actually, I didn't do that. I stood outside at 3 p.m. on a Friday, but they did the Saturday morning, to give credit where it's due. And we had heard this sort of rhetoric in the community about basically families not valuing early childhood education. And we sort of instinctively maybe felt like that wasn't the full story. And so we talked with parents and other community members about their ideas about early childhood education, what they would be interested in, why they valued it, if they valued it, and what they wanted. So anyways, that was 4 years ago we did that. And then an econ professor and I started collaborating to build this project out. So we then interviewed childcare providers in the community and kind of put the community responses into conversation with the childcare providers. And so we have been working on a paper kind of analyzing where we see alignment between their perspectives, where we see gaps, and what we can learn from basically listening to the voices of the people who are doing this work every day, because the community has been trying to organize, to create more early childhood education opportunities, but there's maybe a little bit of a disconnect between like the grassroots movement related to that and then the economic development sort of government. And I think in some ways the perspectives on why this matters are a lot closer than we might think. And there's an opportunity for coalition building there and everything. So anyways, that's a project that is quite a long time in the making. Well, the project is one thing, the paper is something else.
Exactly. So thank you so much for joining us today on SHEP Talks. I know it must be incredibly busy with this semester full swing, so I'm incredibly grateful that you're able to spend a few moments so we could hear about your work. Until next time, this is SHEP Talks.